What happens when a power-hungry HOA board makes the fatal mistake of targeting an FBI agent's family? Today, I'm going to tell you about Agent Marcus Thompson, a 20-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and how he systematically dismantled the most corrupt homeowners association in suburban Virginia. This isn't just another HOA horror story. This is a masterclass in federal-level revenge that left an entire neighborhood board behind bars. Marcus had spent 2 decades putting away criminals, from white-collar fraudsters to organized crime bosses, but nothing in his career prepared him for the war that would unfold right in his own backyard, in the prestigious Willowbrook Estates. What started as petty HOA harassment quickly escalated into something far more sinister, and when they crossed the line by targeting his disabled daughter, Marcus decided it was time to remind these suburban tyrants exactly who they were dealing with. Willowbrook Estates looked like the American dream on the surface: manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and houses that screamed upper-middle-class success. The community boasted some of the strictest HOA rules in Fairfax County, with monthly fees of $800 and a rule book thicker than most legal contracts. The residents paid premium prices for this level of community standards, and most were happy to comply. Marcus moved his family there in 2019 after his promotion to senior special agent. His wife Sarah was a pediatric nurse at the local children's hospital, and their 12-year-old daughter Emma needed the stability of a good school district. Emma had been born with cerebral palsy, requiring a wheelchair and various mobility aids, but she was brilliant, funny, and the light of her parents' lives. The Thompson family thought they had found their forever home at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive. The house was perfect, single-story for Emma's accessibility needs, with wide doorways and a ramp that the previous owners had installed. The backyard was spacious enough for Emma's therapy equipment, and the neighborhood seemed family-friendly. For the first 6 months, everything was peaceful. Marcus worked his cases, Sarah helped heal sick children, and Emma thrived in her new school. The neighbors were polite, if distant, and the HOA seemed like a minor inconvenience at worst. That all changed when Patricia Blackwood was elected as the new HOA president. Patricia Blackwood was everything wrong with suburban power structures, wrapped up in a 62-year-old package of barely contained rage and entitlement. A retired real estate attorney with too much time on her hands and a desperate need to control something, anything. Patricia saw the HOA presidency as her chance to rule a small kingdom. She had lived in Willowbrook Estates for 15 years, gradually, working her way up through various committee positions. Patricia was the type of person who measured her grass with a ruler to ensure it met HOA specifications and took photographs of her neighbors' minor infractions like she was documenting war crimes. Within her first month as president, Patricia instituted new rules that seemed designed specifically to make residents' lives miserable. Pool hours were restricted to narrow windows that excluded most working families. Holiday decorations were limited to a 2-week period with pre-approved color schemes only. Parking regulations became so complex that even residents with PhDs struggled to understand them. But Patricia's real power came from her ability to manipulate the HOA board and leverage the community's legal framework. She had stacked the board with her cronies, real estate agent Janet Mills, retired banker Harold Peterson, and stay-at-home mom-turned-HOA enforcer Rebecca Walsh. Together, they formed what residents privately called the Iron Triangle, and they ruled Willowbrook Estates with an iron fist. Marcus initially tried to stay out of HOA politics. His job required enough conflict resolution, and he preferred to keep his home life peaceful. He paid his fees on time, kept his property immaculate, and figured that compliance would keep him off Patricia's radar. That strategy worked until the day Patricia noticed Emma's wheelchair ramp. It started with a letter. Not an email or a phone call, but an official HOA violation notice delivered by certified mail on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2021. Marcus found it waiting for him when he returned from a week-long assignment tracking down a fugitive embezzler. The letter was written in the cold, legal language that Patricia loved to deploy. It informed the Thompson family that their unauthorized structural modification, Emma's wheelchair ramp, violated community architectural standards and must be removed within 30 days. The fine for non-compliance would be $200 per day, with potential legal action if the violation continued beyond 60 days. Marcus read the letter 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding something. The ramp had been installed by the previous owners with full HOA approval. He had the permits and documentation in his files, but Patricia's letter claimed that the approval had expired when ownership transferred, and the new board had voted to revoke permission for all non-essential exterior modifications. Sarah found Marcus at the kitchen table that evening, still staring at the letter with a mixture of disbelief and rage. 20 years of FBI training had taught him to control his emotions, but this felt personal in a way that criminal investigations never did. These people were attacking his daughter's ability to access her own home. The next morning, Marcus called the HOA office and requested a meeting with Patricia. Her secretary, a nervous woman named Linda who clearly feared her boss, scheduled him for the following Friday at 2 p.m. Marcus took the afternoon off work, put on his best suit, and prepared for what he hoped would be a reasonable conversation between adults. Patricia's office was in the community center, a modest building that she had transformed into her personal headquarters. The walls were covered with architectural plans, community guidelines, and photographs of code violations that she had personally documented. She sat behind an oversized mahogany desk that seemed designed to intimidate visitors, with the HOA's legal charter prominently displayed behind her chair. Marcus explained the situation calmly and professionally. He showed Patricia the documentation, proving that the ramp had been properly approved and installed. He emphasized Emma's medical needs and the Americans with Disabilities Act protections that should apply. He even offered to pay for any additional permits or inspections that might be required. Patricia listened to his presentation with the patient expression of a teacher waiting for a slow student to finish reciting a wrong answer. When Marcus finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled in a way that made his skin crawl. "Mr. Thompson," she said, using his civilian title with obvious deliberation, "I understand that you think your circumstances are special. But the rules exist for everyone, and I won't make exceptions just because someone's child has problems. The ramp creates an eyesore that affects property values, and frankly, if you needed accommodations like this, you should have chosen a different community." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. He had interrogated murderers who showed more empathy than this woman, but he kept his voice level and tried once more. "Mrs. Blackwood, we're talking about my 12-year-old daughter's ability to enter and exit her own home safely. Surely we can find a compromise that works for everyone." Patricia's smile widened. "The compromise is simple, Mr. Thompson. Remove the ramp, or we'll remove it for you and add the cost to your account. This meeting is over." Marcus left Patricia's office knowing that he was dealing with someone who operated on pure malice, but he was still thinking like a law enforcement officer, believing that reason and proper procedures would eventually prevail. He hired a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes and ADA compliance, thinking that legal pressure would force Patricia to back down. That was his first mistake. Patricia didn't just welcome the legal challenge, she seemed to feed off it. Within days of receiving the lawyer's letter, the Thompson family found themselves buried under an avalanche of new violation notices. Suddenly, their mailbox was 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. Their garden mulch was the wrong shade of brown. Emma's medical equipment visible in the backyard constituted unsightly storage. The American flag that Marcus had proudly displayed for 20 years was flying from a pole that violated the new patriotic display guidelines. Each violation came with fines, and the fines multiplied daily. Within 2 weeks, the Thompson family owed the HOA over $3,000 in penalties for infractions that hadn't existed when they moved in. Patricia's strategy was transparent, but effective. She was trying to force them out through financial attrition. Marcus's lawyer filed motion after motion, but Patricia had done her homework. The HOA's legal charter gave the board enormous discretionary power, and she had been careful to document every violation with photographs and precise measurements. The local courts were reluctant to interfere with what they saw as internal community disputes, especially when the HOA could demonstrate that they were simply enforcing their rules consistently. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated her personal campaign against the Thompson family. She organized community safety walks that coincidentally always passed by their house during Emma's outdoor therapy sessions. She sent letters to other residents, warning them about the declining property standards that could affect their home values. She even contacted Emma's school to complain about the family's non-compliance with community standards. The psychological warfare was taking its toll. Sarah was working extra shifts at the hospital to cover the mounting legal fees, and the stress was affecting her health. Emma was beginning to ask why the mean lady from the neighborhood didn't want her to live there. Marcus found himself lying, awake at night, running through scenarios in his mind like he was planning a federal investigation. That's when he realized he was approaching this all wrong. After 3 months of playing defense, Marcus decided it was time to go on the offense. But he wouldn't just fight Patricia, he would investigate her. 20 years of federal law enforcement had taught him that people who abuse power in small ways usually abuse it in bigger ways too. And people who showed such callous disregard for legal protections like the ADA were probably cutting corners in other areas as well. Marcus started where he always started investigations, with financial records. HOAs handle significant amounts of money, and Patricia's board had been remarkably secretive about their spending. The monthly reports to residents were vague, and requests for detailed financial information were routinely denied as not necessary for homeowner review. Using his federal credentials, Marcus began pulling public records. Willowbrook Estates HOA was required to file certain documents with the county, and what he found immediately raised red flags. The HOA's reported expenses didn't match their stated activities, and there were significant discrepancies in the reserve fund amounts. Marcus then did what FBI agents do best. He started following the money. The HOA's primary account was with First National Bank of Virginia, but there were also accounts with 2 smaller regional banks. Cross-referencing the account activity with the publicly filed reports revealed a pattern of funds being moved around in ways that seemed designed to obscure their ultimate destination. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that Patricia had established a management company called Blackwood Community Services just 2 months after becoming HOA president. The company had no employees, other than Patricia herself, but it was receiving monthly payments of $12,000 from the HOA for professional management services. This was interesting, because Patricia was supposedly serving as an unpaid volunteer president. The HOA's budget already included management fees paid to a legitimate property management company, but somehow Patricia's shell company was collecting additional fees for services that were never clearly defined. Marcus dug deeper. Blackwood Community Services had contracts with several vendors who provided landscaping, maintenance, and security services to the HOA. But when Marcus drove by these businesses during his lunch breaks, he discovered something fascinating. Most of them didn't exist. The addresses led to empty strip malls, closed businesses, and in one case, a Starbucks. Patricia wasn't just power-hungry, she was stealing from her own community. Once Marcus confirmed that Patricia was running a financial fraud scheme, he faced a decision that would define the rest of this story. He could turn his evidence over to local authorities and let them handle the prosecution. It would be clean, professional, and completely by the book. Or he could remember that this woman had spent months terrorizing his disabled daughter, and decide that Patricia deserved to learn what happens when you mess with a federal agent's family. Marcus chose the latter option. Instead of immediately arresting Patricia, Marcus decided to let her continue operating while he built an ironclad federal case. He contacted his colleagues in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and requested permission to open an official investigation into potential mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. The financial crimes were occurring across state lines. Some of Patricia's fake vendors had addresses in Maryland and Washington, D.C., which gave the FBI jurisdiction. His supervisors were initially skeptical about using federal resources for what looked like a local HOA dispute. But when Marcus presented his preliminary evidence, they realized they were looking at a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that could potentially involve hundreds of thousands of dollars and dozens of victims. The FBI opened Operation Willowbrook in August 2021, with Marcus as the lead investigator. For the first time in months, he smiled when he thought about Patricia Blackwood. Now, Patricia wasn't just his neighbor, she was his target. Once Marcus confirmed that Patricia was running a financial fraud scheme, he faced a decision that would define the rest of this story. He could turn his evidence over to local authorities and let them handle the prosecution. It would be clean, professional, and completely by the book. Or he could remember that this woman had spent months terrorizing his disabled daughter, and decide that Patricia deserved to learn what happens when you mess with a federal agent's family. Marcus chose the latter option. Instead of immediately arresting Patricia, Marcus decided to let her continue operating while he built an ironclad federal case. He contacted his colleagues in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and requested permission to open an official investigation into potential mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges. The financial crimes were occurring across state lines. Some of Patricia's fake vendors had addresses in Maryland and Washington, D.C., which gave the FBI jurisdiction. His supervisors were initially skeptical about using federal resources for what looked like a local HOA dispute. But when Marcus presented his preliminary evidence, they realized they were looking at a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that could potentially involve hundreds of thousands of dollars and dozens of victims. The FBI opened Operation Willowbrook in August 2021, with Marcus as the lead investigator. For the first time in months, he smiled when he thought about Patricia Blackwood. Now, Patricia wasn't just his neighbor, she was his target. With federal backing, Marcus could deploy resources that Patricia never saw coming. The FBI obtained warrants for the HOA's banking records, Patricia's personal finances, and the communications of all board members. They installed surveillance equipment and began monitoring Patricia's activities around the clock. What they discovered was a fraud scheme that was both more extensive and more brazen than Marcus had initially suspected. Patricia had been stealing from the HOA for over 2 years, well before she became president. She had started small, approving payments to fake vendors for minor maintenance work. But once she gained control of the board, the scheme exploded in scope. Patricia had created an entire ecosystem of fraudulent businesses. Blackwood Landscaping billed the HOA $40,000 for tree removal services that were never performed. Patriot Security Systems charged monthly fees for monitoring services while providing only cardboard cameras. Elite Property Solutions submitted invoices for repairs to community amenities that were already in perfect condition. The fake vendor scheme was impressive enough, but Patricia had also been manipulating the HOA's reserve funds. Money that was supposed to be saved for major repairs and emergencies was being transferred to high-risk investment accounts that Patricia controlled personally. When those investments lost money, which happened frequently, Patricia simply authorized new special assessments on homeowners to replenish the funds. Marcus discovered that Patricia had stolen over $600,000 from the community over 3 years. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. Patricia had also been using her position to engage in insider real estate deals, pressuring residents to use her preferred contractors and service providers, and accepting kickbacks from local businesses. Most disturbingly, Marcus found evidence that Patricia had been systematically targeting families with disabilities, elderly residents, and anyone else she viewed as vulnerable. The Thompson family wasn't her first victim. They were just the latest in a long line of residents who had been harassed, fined, and legally intimidated for Patricia's personal satisfaction. By December 2021, Marcus had enough evidence to arrest Patricia and her entire board. But he wanted to do more than just put them in jail. He wanted to completely destroy the system of abuse they had created. So he decided to let Patricia make one final catastrophic mistake. Marcus began subtly spreading information through the community that several families were considering legal action against the HOA over disability discrimination. He made sure this information reached Patricia through her network of neighborhood informants, knowing that her arrogance would compel her to escalate the situation. Patricia took the bait exactly as Marcus had predicted. Instead of backing down or seeking legal counsel, she decided to make an example of the Thompson family that would discourage other residents from challenging her authority. On the morning of December 15th, Patricia arrived at the Thompson house. With a crew of contractors and a sheriff's deputy, she had obtained a court order authorizing the removal of Emma's wheelchair ramp as a public nuisance, claiming that the family had ignored multiple legal notices and fines. Sarah was at work, and Emma was at school, leaving Marcus alone to face Patricia's final assault on his family. He stood in his driveway, watching contractors prepare to tear down the ramp that allowed his daughter to access her own home, and felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Patricia approached him with a triumphant smile, clearly savoring what she thought was her ultimate victory. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I hope this teaches you that no one is above community standards, not even people who think their federal jobs make them special." Marcus looked at Patricia for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and made a call that she would remember for the rest of her life. "This is Agent Thompson," he said calmly. "Execute the warrants. Now." What happened next was something that Willowbrook Estates residents would talk about for years. FBI vehicles poured into the neighborhood from every direction. Agents in tactical gear surrounded Patricia's house, the community center, and the homes of every HOA board member simultaneously. Patricia's face went white as she realized that the federal job she had mocked was about to destroy her life. She tried to run back to her car, but FBI agents were already waiting for her. The contractors working on Emma's ramp stopped what they were doing and watched in stunned silence as Patricia Blackwood was placed in handcuffs and read her rights. Marcus stood in his driveway, still calm and professional, as Patricia was loaded into a federal transport vehicle. As the car drove past him, he could see her staring out the window with an expression of absolute disbelief. The FBI raids netted 4 arrests that day. Patricia and her 3 board members were charged with conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, and theft from programs receiving federal funding. The total value of the fraud was calculated at just over $800,000, making it a federal felony with potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison. But Marcus wasn't done yet. As the lead investigator on Operation Willowbrook, he had uncovered evidence of crimes that went far beyond simple embezzlement. Patricia had been coordinating with contractors to overbill the HOA, sharing kickbacks with local officials to ignore regulatory violations, and using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, ranging from luxury vacations to her daughter's wedding. The investigation also revealed that Patricia had been deliberately targeting families with disabilities, elderly residents, and military. Families with harassment campaigns designed to force them to sell their homes at below-market prices. She would then use her real estate connections to flip these properties for significant profits. The federal prosecution of Patricia Blackwood and her co-conspirators became a landmark case in HOA fraud litigation. The evidence that Marcus had gathered was so comprehensive that all 4 defendants pleaded guilty rather than face trial. Patricia herself received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of probation and full restitution. To the HOA, her assets, including her house in Willowbrook Estates, were seized and sold to help repay the stolen funds. The other board members received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement in the scheme. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning of Patricia's punishment. The FBI investigation had uncovered evidence of additional crimes involving other HOAs where Patricia had served as a consultant. Federal prosecutors in 3 states opened their own cases, and Patricia faced the prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison. The civil lawsuits came next. Dozens of families that had been harassed, fined, or forced to sell their homes filed suit against Patricia personally and the HOA entity. The total civil judgments exceeded $2 million, ensuring that Patricia would never financially recover even if she served her full sentence. Perhaps most satisfying for Marcus was the complete dismantling of the system that Patricia had created. The HOA's charter was revoked by the state, and a new community association was established with strict oversight and transparency requirements. The new board included several of Patricia's former victims, and their first official act was to formally apologize to the Thompson family and permanently approve Emma's wheelchair ramp. In the months following Patricia's arrest, Marcus became something of a legend in HOA reform circles. He received interview requests from news outlets across the country and was invited to speak at conferences about combating HOA abuse. But he preferred to keep a low profile and focus on his family. Emma's wheelchair ramp was not only preserved, but upgraded with new safety features paid for by the restitution funds. The little girl who had been the target of Patricia's cruelest attacks was now the happy, thriving center of a community that had learned to value inclusion over conformity. Sarah returned to working normal hours at the hospital, and the stress-related health problems she had developed during the HOA harassment gradually resolved. The family that had been under siege for over a year was finally able to enjoy their home in peace. For Marcus, the case represented more than just professional success. It was personal vindication for every family that had ever been bullied by petty tyrants with small-time power. He had used every skill and resource at his disposal to protect his daughter and hold accountable people who thought they were above the law. The Willowbrook Estates case also led to broader reforms in HOA oversight and regulation. Marcus testified before the Virginia legislature about the need for stronger financial transparency requirements and protection for vulnerable residents. Several bills were passed that made it harder for future Patricia Blackwoods to abuse their positions. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the danger of unchecked power in any form. Patricia Blackwood had started as an ordinary resident who wanted to maintain property values. But power, even the limited power of an HOA presidency, had corrupted her completely. She had become a criminal and a bully, destroying the very community she claimed to protect. Marcus often reflected on how different things might have been if Patricia had simply approved Emma's ramp that first day. Instead of facing federal prison, she could have been remembered as a leader who made her community more inclusive and welcoming. Instead of becoming the villain in a story of federal justice, she could have been a hero in a story of community cooperation. Today, Patricia Blackwood sits in federal prison, serving the 8th year of her 12-year sentence. Her former mansion in Willowbrook Estates is now home to a young military family with twin boys who love playing in the backyard that Patricia once monitored for rule violations. Emma Thompson is now 20 years old, studying criminal justice at George Mason University, with plans to follow in her father's footsteps. She still uses a wheelchair, but she also has something that Patricia Blackwood will never have again: the freedom to come and go from her home as she pleases. Marcus retired from the FBI in 2023, after 30 years of service that included some of the most high-profile cases in federal law enforcement. But when people ask him about his most satisfying case, he doesn't talk about the organized crime bosses or the international fraudsters he helped put away. He talks about the day he reminded a suburban tyrant that some families fight back. And when they do, they fight to win. The lesson of Willowbrook Estates is simple but powerful. Be careful who you choose as your enemy. You never know when that quiet neighbor might turn out to be someone with the skills, resources, and determination to dismantle your entire world piece by piece. Patricia Blackwood learned that lesson too late, but her story serves as a warning to every petty tyrant in every HOA across America. The family you're targeting today might be the one that brings you down tomorrow. And sometimes justice comes not from the courts or the community, but from someone who knows exactly how to investigate, prosecute, and destroy people who abuse their power. Just ask Patricia Blackwood if you can find her behind federal prison bars.